All right, for our next panel, we've been talking a lot today about where the edge is, whether that edge is on a naval ship in the South China Sea, or if it's at an outpost in Africa, an embassy, a consulate. And the reason we are talking about all these locations is because all of those locations need to connect with the data in order to get the mission done. So let's talk about connecting data. Please welcome to the stage TraudLinde Clark, a CISO at a DOJ component, and Matt Hayden, the VP of Cyber and Emerging Threats for GDIT. Okay, so TraudLinde, thank you for joining us. And as we have been talking today, look, there is a real push for federal agencies to build the security architectures that allow them and allow their workforce to connect to the data that they need to do in order to fulfill their mission. So in your eyes, what are some of the key steps and barriers agencies encounter in order to get to this streamlined network and still achieving what they need to achieve when it comes to FISMA and Zero Trust and all the other compliance metrics that they have to hit?
So I think throughout this entire panel, you'll notice a theme that I have, and a lot of that is education and understanding of where the mission is and what exactly does it do and what does it need. And the key steps really is getting the IT personnel and the data personnel all in a place where they can truly understand what the use cases are and understand what those edge devices are and what intermittent connectivity they might need or data specifically they might need, because without that education and understanding, you're just going to continue doing something over and over and over again, and it's never going to actually achieve what needs to be done. And then just streamlining everything again is find a way to get to a yes faster. There's lots of vendors who want to sell you things, lots of widgets out there that do a lot of the similar things, but they don't get you to where you need to go faster. And there's always a way to get there as fast as you can while getting compliance and while getting understanding.
So, Matt, how are you helping get those agencies there faster? I mean, we're talking about edge forward, obviously, getting to that forward as fast as possible.
So one of the words that we like to use is dynamic enterprise. I mean, in a perfect world, a CISO, a CIO would have both mission-based systems and core enterprise all under the same rubric of controls, the same level of security, but we're just not there yet. So what we bring to the fight is we start looking at where those mission indicators and control families really need to be bolstered or innovated around so that you're really getting the core insights you need, which are, is this the person or machine that should be using this? Is this data allowed to that individual? And in the area of sort of that identity window, which is where we see a lot of the threat space, is that being audited and updated in a live pattern? Because we talked a lot about disconnected and contested networks. That's where a lot of that battle space is while you're disconnected, can I abuse the privilege that's been revoked over here on a disconnected network over there? So there's a lot of integration of security controls that work. I also want to say that we bring, from a security standpoint, you see a lot of, oh, you're adding, and I heard the word clunky for security, whoever used that. The challenge we have is that security isn't an afterthought anymore. It's brought along. But as our security teams start working and integrating true emerging technology, we actually become chaos engineers. Our job is to say, I'm going to disrupt what you count on. And you will get the staunch look right back at you like, wait a minute, no, I count on that. It's hyper resilient. Like, nope, it's off the table. I just red carded that. Now what? And that level of expertise in knowing how, when chaos happens, how you can be resilient, how you can take a punch, what data can survive for decision making, that's the kind of thing that we're making sure all our customers have at their disposal.
So, TraudLinde, being a chaos engineer, what are the best practices there to still be able to consider security part of the mission, but also still have what you need to from a security standpoint, a visibility standpoint, and a compliance standpoint?
I think one of the key practices that a lot of the new age today forgets is security fundamentals. Security 101 are the utmost importance. A lot of attacks and a lot of incidents, a lot of contingency events are usually related to something very fundamental to cybersecurity, whether it's password 123 or it's a misconfiguration or it's some kind of data leak or thing that you just needed a toggle in the front, right? Those best practices have stood the test of time, yet over time, we tend to forget what those fundamentals are. And in order to keep that compliance, if you really look at everything underneath the hood, it's all fundamentals. Zero trust, instead of, trust then verify, it's now verify then trust, right? Well, that's a least privilege thing. You only have access to what you need access to. So in my opinion, the key best practices are, again, education and understanding those fundamentals, because once you have those fundamentals, you can then apply it to anything, whether it's at the edge or whether it's back at a headquarters or whether it's in a car or a drone. I heard drones earlier, but it doesn't matter. Those fundamentals are utmost important.
So how do you see the security tooling evolving even with those fundamentals and given the attack surface space, like you were saying, whether it's drones, cars, we were talking about boats in the South China Sea, like all over the world, clearly we have a global workforce, global mission, and so we need a global network which introduces all different types of new use cases, but you still have to have that security in it. So is the tooling keeping up with the way that things are changing? And if it isn't, where are those gaps persisting?
I think the tools are definitely keeping up. They are more modern. They're using things like API and cloud, and they're able to connect to a lot of pieces that we have out there. But the gaps still exist when you have items and assets that don't connect. And so they're sitting in a drawer somewhere, or it's a standalone iPad that manages a drone, or it's a server that's sitting in a corner and nobody's plugged in for 10 years. Right, that's the big gap, is that area of mission may need those pieces, and they plug it in every once in a while, or it connects to the satellite every once in a while. And that's where I think the big gap with the more modern tools are because they can't connect to them, right? But when you have something that's connected, when you have something that's working that way, then these tools are great. Right, there's a lot of stuff out there. I would say a lot of gaps as well when it comes to tooling is you have big companies buy little companies, and suddenly they're the best thing since sliced bread that does this thing and that thing and the other thing all in one tool. Well, as an agency, I don't want 50 tools that do independent things, but I also don't want one big monolithic tool that claims to do everything correctly.
So, Matt, in your eyes, where do you see the tooling meeting the mission?
So a lot of the security by design impulses and taglines have been around how we need to look at the way our security operations work and make sure that everything is being plugged into the security controls we have. And so it comes down to that foundational understanding of what is an essential security tool and are you meeting those needs. So good news is a lot of industry is doing really well around that. The bad news is, as you mentioned, a lot of them are going into that single platform or the multi-application platform to where they're like, yes, that works great if you have our third, fourth, fifth, or sixth, seventh service. We have the luxury of that's starting to curve the other direction. We're starting to see the platforms interacting a little better. Look at EDR and the other technologies where there was a time when they didn't talk to each other, now they all do. So there is kind of that bending of the curve back towards transparency of the security operations, which is key. So the security operations and the security controls, I'm wondering, TraudLinde, how do you see mandates like FISMA or NIST's 800-171 or Zero Trust, how do you see that accelerating or maybe even complicating the adoption of the security architectures?
I think FISMA is great, right? We have to abide by it. It's like our little Bible. But the interpretation of controls that were written 2014 and later, right? The interpretation of how I see it in doing security for years might be different than somebody who's just getting into it and their world is the cloud, their world is IoT, their world is connection. And so you have to, again, educate that gap in understanding and interpretation, because these controls are an intent, and a lot of people try to force fit what they see on paper versus truly understanding what the intent of a security control is, which I think causes some issues when it comes to applying security. If the control says I have to have a purple chair, well, I have a gold one. Does that work too? Right? As long as I have a place to sit, doesn't matter what color it is. And it's that understanding, again, of that mission and the application of the control to then make sure you have what you need while you're in compliance and getting everyone to understand that same interpretation.
Matt, I would love to hear your experience on that balance there of making sure that, yeah, if the compliance sheet says, no, you must have a purple chair, you can figure out a way to keep the purple chair, maybe have a gold chair, and everybody can sit where they need to in order to get the job done.
I mean, who doesn't like having a report card and goals and objectives that you get hit? These are largely families of barometers of your risk appetite. And so when we look at FISMA and we look at the different NIST standards, they're giving you a height chart of where you are in your modern security stack and how you're doing as far as implementing certain controls. But it's all risk-based. It's all threat-driven. So if you have a control family that is not being met, but you're air-gapped and you have a low threshold of a low risk of something, you can document that. You can kind of communicate that. But the exercise is to think about it. It's not to say, I don't have this compliance or that compliance as a core outcome. The outcome is, I considered every one of these security controls, I looked at my risk perspective, and this is where my risk appetite allows me to produce operational outcomes leveraging these tools.
So let's talk about that risk appetite. TraudLinde, where do you see the blind spots when it comes to risk in the current climate? And how can they be reduced based on how we're moving, where the edge is everywhere?
I think understanding risk is different for everyone. You know, I used to be, in the beginning of my CISO career, be very risk adverse, right? We were always the no people. And then over time, security became a choose your own adventure book, right? As long as I understood your mission and I understood what you needed, I could get you there, but to the left might be 10 requirements, to the right might be 4, so can we go to the right? And that leads to inefficiencies if people don't understand how to assess that risk and really how to tie that risk all the way back to the mission. Because how can you tie very easily, in a way that the business folks understand, the mission folks understand, why do I need an EDR? How do I tie that to, you know, the Justice Department or the Marshal Service's mission or the DEA's mission or anybody's mission there directly, so folks can understand? And then, you know, blind spots are definitely budget, right? If you don't have budget, you don't have your security tools, you don't have a lot of those things, you don't have people. And so if you don't pay attention to what you're spending, then you're going to end up with a gap somewhere. You're going to end up with a tool that's not applied properly, or you're going to end up with a SOC that doesn't have the right number of people to monitor everything, and there goes a threat, you know?
So, Matt, to build upon that, what are the conversations like when you're talking about the risk appetite that you talked about earlier with the different agencies or organizations?
So part of the challenge is that you don't only have a technology problem, you have a people problem when it comes to security. And so the reason I would say it's a people problem is because some of the tools for our broader enterprises have gotten really good, and that leads our adversaries to take on the users of those platforms. So we talk about the basics of cybersecurity. Candidly, 7, 8 years ago, it was easier to take on an enterprise at the firewall than it was to try and spoof my ID. It is now flipped. It is easier for adversaries to come after me than it is my enterprise, no matter where it is. And so we have to make sure that all of the people know what their risk elements are, what they have access to matters. And so it is that least privileged mindset, but at the same time, it's something to where most users have been using technology in ways, whether they are an incoming generation that's used to the smartphone world and a lot of apps, just all immediate satisfaction of information and decision making, all the way back to individuals that are used to, I put my password into every web page, therefore I'm secure. And you have to balance those assumptions of security from a people perspective and integrate that into your family of controls and make sure that that doesn't lend itself to the SOC backdoor, because you can't have a standardized behavior practice for everyone. It has to be balanced and candidly very dynamic.
So, TraudLinde, you hinted at it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could dive a little bit deeper in how you think agencies have adjusted to securing a borderless operational reality.
So borderless, you know, it's in your hands, it's in the cars, it's in the boats, it's in all these places. So again, I go back to fundamentals, right? Each of these devices, you know, phones and tablets and things that can connect to a mobile device management platform, they're kind of easy to manage and pay attention to. But when you have something like a boat or a drone that all the data is on it and of itself, you kind of just, you have to rely on the security with the device itself. You have to look at, you know, scarily enough, supply chain issues with the hardware or the boards that are in there or the connections, right? Are you connecting in a secure manner to a satellite to get your iPad to talk to your drone? Are you doing all those pieces? And if if you don't have an understanding of how the device works, or you don't understand how the security of that firmware or those pieces are on the device itself, you're going to have problems connecting it back to the mainland anyway, right? So having that borderless understanding that, and again, going back to education, understanding that mission set and designing for intermittent connectivity and thinking that that's going to happen up front and implementing that. So rather than just sending security to the left, you're also sending mission understanding to the left and designing for it in the beginning rather than waiting until something breaks in the end when it's really important.
So for missions at the edge that might be insulated or disconnected, what do you think about meshing the data workflows to make sure that that intermittent really is intermittent?
I think it's critically important. Again, you have to set things up understanding that it might be intermittent connectivity. You have to store things locally, and again, put the fundamentals on whatever you store locally, and then possibly partner with another agency. That's one of the key things that I think individual agencies in the federal government tend to forget is underneath the hood, while we all might have an individualized mission for our individual agency, we are ultimately trying to protect the nation's data, people, techniques, tactics, and all of that. So why can't I go to FBI and say, hey, you've got a connection out here in remote, Alabama, and I really need that because I've got a mission going on out there. Can I borrow that for a little bit? Can I do a connectivity agreement with you and find a way to securely do that? A lot of agencies, no offense to any other agencies in the room, but they have egos. You got to put it aside when mission needs to get done and find a way to get to that yes and make sure that you can do it in a way and plan for it before it ever happens, because the last thing you want to do is not have synced up intel data when you've got people in the field trying to find something or find someone or fix something and get their mission done.
So Matt, I ask you, how can federal agencies mesh data flows together to make sure that there aren't gaps in security and they can deal with the intermittent outages or any sort of hiccups that may come from having this borderless?
Well, it was hit on earlier, foundational dependencies are really where that falls. So like if this particular insight or operation or action is dependent on 12 different data sources being readily available, what happens if you have 10? What do you do in that situation? Does it tell the user that it has incomplete data when it provided that insight or that type of clarity? But one of the challenges you'll find with that is common operating picture is where the government wants to head. They want for the agencies themselves to be able to share data freely in a secure manner and to also be able to see kind of that one team, one fight mentality across our different mission sets that really do align. So when we start talking about what does a cop require, that's where we're looking at the foundational architecture supports candidly secure sharing, and it also is a world that builds upon where those different missions have different value to enrich outcomes across the board. Because you can't just say, I'm going to borrow data for the FBI, you actually have to be able to blend it. The good news is that all our shiny baubles demand this. So all our AI, our agentic AI, all of our new use cases for a lot of the buzzwords we're hearing coming out of Silicon Valley require this. And so we're gonna start to see a lot of buy-in from our C-suites and our commercial operators that traditionally didn't look at sharing as positively, as now they're contributing to the expertise that's being shared from their agency digitally and going from there.
So finally, I would imagine that you're probably going to say education because you've been talking about it a lot, but what investments in process, technology, training do you believe are most critical right now for reducing cyber exposure as we move out into the edge?
Did I mention education, training? Did I just say that? No, it really, I do think technology to a certain extent is very cyclical and it changes names, but it's really fundamentally the same thing. But getting, especially in as a government employee, we don't always get training funding, and it's utmost importance that we can at least keep up and speak the language that vendors are coming at us with, right? And if we don't even understand that the cloud really is just someone else's computer, then how can I secure it? Right? And I do think technology is important. You have to, again, fundamentals, understand when things are going end of life, end of support. You have to plan for that because budgets get frozen. Budgets get, taken away from you. And so if you don't understand that technology and investment in that long term, you're going to end up with just holes all over the place.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. Great conversation.
Thank you.